What if I told you that the thing you reach for within seconds of waking up isn't just consuming your time, but quietly reshaping how your mind actually works? 3 weeks ago, I did something that terrified me more than I care to admit. I completely deleted Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and Facebook from my phone. Not hidden in a folder, not logged out, gone. What happened over the next 21 days changed everything I thought I knew about my own mind, and what I'm about to share might be the wake-up call you didn't know you desperately needed. Here's what nobody tells you about social media and mental clarity. It's not about the content you're consuming, it's about what constant stimulation is doing to your brain's natural ability to think. We've been so focused on whether we're seeing positive or negative posts that we've completely missed the deeper issue. Your mind right now is operating in a state of perpetual reaction mode and you don't even realize it. Let me take you through exactly what happened during those 21 days, the surprising discoveries I made about my own mind, and why this simple change created shifts I'm still benefiting from today. But first, we need to understand what we're really dealing with when we talk about social media and mental clarity. Have you noticed how hard it's become to sit with your own thoughts? Not the racing, anxious thoughts, just normal, quiet thinking. When was the last time you had a genuinely original idea that came from nowhere, in a moment of natural stillness? If you're like most people, you can't remember, and there's a reason for that. We've created a world where silence feels uncomfortable, where the space between stimulus and response has virtually disappeared. Your phone buzzes, you respond. You see a notification, you check it. You have 30 seconds of downtime, you scroll. This isn't a character flaw or lack of willpower. This is your brain adapting to an environment of constant stimulation, and in doing so, losing something precious. Let me paint you a picture that might feel familiar. You wake up in the morning and before your feet hit the floor, your hand is reaching for your phone. You tell yourself you're just checking the time, but 20 minutes later, you've scrolled through Instagram, checked your messages, looked at the news, and responded to a few posts. You haven't even brushed your teeth yet, but your mind is already spinning with other people's thoughts, emotions, and agendas. Throughout the day, every spare moment gets filled. Waiting for coffee, scroll. Commercial break, check Instagram. Walking somewhere, listen to a podcast. By evening, you're mentally exhausted, but you can't quite put your finger on why. You haven't done anything particularly challenging, yet your brain feels like it's been running a marathon. Here's what's really happening. Your mind is designed to have natural rhythms of engagement and rest, focus and wandering, input and processing. Social media and constant connectivity have hijacked these rhythms, creating a state of perpetual partial attention where you're always slightly distracted, never fully present, and rarely truly at rest. The deeper issue isn't the time you're spending scrolling, it's that your brain is losing its ability to generate thoughts from silence. Real creativity, genuine insights, and deep understanding emerge from quiet spaces in the mind. When those spaces get filled with constant input, something fundamental shifts. You become a processor of other people's ideas rather than a generator of your own. This shows up in subtle ways you might not even notice. Conversations become harder to focus on because part of your attention is always waiting for the next notification. Reading books becomes more difficult because your brain keeps looking for that quick dopamine hit of scrolling. Even relaxation becomes challenging because true rest requires the ability to be present without stimulation. But here's what gives me hope and what led me to try this experiment. Unlike many modern problems, this one has a solution that's completely within your control. Your brain's natural clarity isn't broken, it's just buried under layers of digital noise. And when you remove that noise, something beautiful begins to emerge. The decision to delete social media apps didn't come from some grand realization or moment of enlightenment. It came from exhaustion. I was sitting in my living room one evening, scrolling through Instagram for the third time in an hour, when I suddenly realized I couldn't remember a single thing I just looked at. Not one post, not one image, nothing. I had just spent 15 minutes of my life in a state of complete mental absence, and this wasn't unusual. This was my normal. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I deleted Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and Facebook from my phone. Not logged out, Deleted. I told myself it was just an experiment. 3 weeks, that's all. I could always re-download them if I needed to. The first day was strange in ways I didn't expect. I kept picking up my phone and automatically swiping to where Instagram used to be. My thumb would tap empty space, and for a split second, I'd feel disoriented. It was like reaching for a light switch in a familiar room and finding the wall had moved. This happened probably 20 times that first day, and each time I realized just how unconscious this habit had become. But something else started happening. Instead of scrolling, I began noticing things, real things. The way light moved across my kitchen table in the afternoon. The actual taste of my morning coffee instead of just drinking it while staring at a screen. These weren't profound spiritual experiences, they were just moments of basic presence that I'd forgotten were possible. By day 3, my brain started doing something it hadn't done in years. It began generating random thoughts. Not anxious thoughts or to-do lists, but actual creative, curious thoughts. I'd be walking and suddenly wonder about something completely unrelated to anything I was doing. Why do trees grow the way they do? What would happen if humans hibernate? These weren't earth-shattering questions, but they were mine. They came from my own mind, not from something I'd seen online. The sleep changes started around day 5. I'd always been someone who needed to scroll for a few minutes before falling asleep. It was my way of winding down. Without that option, I began actually winding down. Lying in darkness, letting my thoughts naturally settle instead of filling my mind with other people's content right before trying to rest. The quality of my sleep improved dramatically. But the real breakthrough came around day 10. I was sitting in a cafe waiting for a friend who was running late. Normally, this would have been prime scrolling time. Instead, I just sat there. At first, it felt uncomfortable, that familiar itch to stimulate my brain with something, anything. But I stayed with the discomfort and something shifted. My mind began wandering in the most pleasant way, making connections between seemingly unrelated things, coming up with solutions to problems I'd been stuck on for weeks. This wasn't meditation or any kind of formal practice. This was just what happens when you give your brain permission to do what it's naturally designed to do: think, process, and create without constant external input. Here's what transforms everything about mental clarity. It's not something you achieve or acquire. It's something you uncover by removing what's obscuring it. Your mind already has everything it needs to think clearly, focus deeply, and generate original insights. Social media isn't preventing you from finding clarity. It's preventing you from accessing the clarity that's already there. Let me tell you about Sarah, a friend who tried this experiment after hearing about my experience. Sarah was a creative director at an advertising agency, someone whose job literally required creative thinking. She was convinced that social media was part of her creative process, inspiration gathering, she called it. She spent hours scrolling through design feeds, photography accounts, and creative hashtags, telling herself it was work-related research. 3 days into her digital detox, Sarah had what she described as a creative crisis. She sat down to work on a campaign and felt completely blank. No ideas, no inspiration, nothing. She told me later that she almost re-downloaded Instagram that morning because she felt creatively paralyzed without her usual sources of inspiration. But she pushed through that discomfort and something remarkable happened. By the end of week 1, ideas started coming from nowhere. Not variations on things she'd seen online, but genuinely original concepts that surprised even her. She realized that what she'd been calling inspiration gathering was actually idea substitution. Instead of generating her own creative thoughts, she'd been collecting and recombining other people's ideas. Week 2 brought even deeper changes. Sarah started noticing details in the physical world that she'd been blind to for years. The way shadows fell across buildings during her walk to work. The interesting conversations happening at neighboring tables and restaurants. The subtle expressions on people's faces during meetings. Her world became more vivid, more textured, more real. By week 3, Sarah had what she called a revelation about the nature of creativity itself. Real creative insight, she realized, doesn't come from consuming more input, it comes from processing the input you already have in new ways. When her mind wasn't constantly taking in new visual information from social media, it began making unexpected connections between existing knowledge, experiences, and observations. This reveals something profound about how mental clarity actually works. We think clarity comes from having more information, better tools, or superior techniques. But true clarity emerges from the space between thoughts, the quiet moments when your mind can process, integrate, and generate rather than just consume. While most people try to improve their mental clarity by adding things, meditation apps, productivity systems, brain training games, the path to genuine clarity often involves subtracting things that are creating mental noise. Social media creates a particular kind of noise that's especially harmful to clear thinking because it's designed to be addictive, emotionally triggering, and endlessly available. Think about how a river works. When water flows freely, it's clear and clean. But when you add debris, sediment, and obstacles, the water becomes murky and turbulent. Your mind works the same way. Social media is like dumping debris into a clear river. Not dangerous debris, just enough small particles to cloud the water and disrupt the natural flow. The beautiful thing about rivers is that when you stop adding debris, they naturally clean themselves. The sediment settles, the particles filter out, and the water returns to its natural clarity. Your mind has this same self-cleaning capacity. Remove the constant input of social media, and mental clarity begins to emerge naturally. After going through this experience and talking to others who've tried similar experiments, I've identified 4 foundations that emerge when you remove social media from your daily routine. These aren't techniques to practice or habits to develop. They're natural capacities that reveal themselves when digital noise is removed. Foundation 1: Present moment awareness. Without the constant option to escape into your phone, you begin relating to the present moment differently. This isn't about forcing yourself to be mindful or practicing presence techniques. It's about removing the primary tool you've been using to avoid the present moment and discovering that the present moment is actually quite interesting when you're fully in it. I noticed this most clearly during routine activities. Making breakfast stopped being something I did while checking my phone and became something I actually experienced. The sound of eggs cooking, the smell of coffee brewing, the feeling of morning sunlight through the kitchen window, these weren't background experiences anymore. They became the actual content of those moments. This shift affects everything. Conversations become richer because you're not partially waiting for your next opportunity to check your phone. Work becomes more engaging because your attention isn't being pulled in multiple directions. Even mundane activities like commuting or doing laundry become opportunities for genuine rest and reflection instead of mindless scrolling. Foundation 2: Natural thought generation. Perhaps the most surprising change was rediscovering my mind's ability to generate thoughts organically. When you're not constantly feeding your brain external content, it begins producing internal content in the most delightful ways. This shows up as sudden curiosity about things you haven't thought about in years, random questions that pop into your head during quiet moments, unexpected solutions to problems you'd been struggling with, creative ideas that seem to come from nowhere but feel completely authentic to who you are. The key insight here is that your brain is constantly processing and integrating your experiences, but this processing happens in the background, during quiet moments. Social media eliminates most of these quiet moments, which means the processing never happens. Important insights, creative connections, and problem-solving breakthroughs get lost in the noise. When you create space for natural thought generation, you're not just improving your creativity, you're allowing your mind to do the essential work of making sense of your life, integrating your experiences, and generating the insights that help you grow and adapt. Foundation 3: Emotional regulation. Social media creates artificial emotional volatility. You're exposed to hundreds of micro-emotional experiences every time you scroll. Outrage, envy, amusement, sadness, excitement, often within the span of minutes. Your emotional system isn't designed to handle this level of stimulation, and over time, it affects your ability to maintain emotional equilibrium in real life. Without this constant emotional whiplash, your natural emotional regulation begins to strengthen. You become less reactive to small irritations. Your moods become more stable and self-generated, rather than dependent on external stimulation. You develop better tolerance for uncomfortable emotions instead of immediately reaching for your phone to distract yourself. This doesn't mean becoming emotionally numb or disconnected. If anything, your emotions become more authentic because they're responding to your actual life rather than to curated representations of other people's lives. You feel more deeply, but also more steadily. Foundation 4. Deep focus capacity. The most practical benefit of removing social media is the gradual return of your ability to focus deeply on single tasks. This isn't just about productivity. Deep focus is where real satisfaction and accomplishments come from. When you can fully immerse yourself in meaningful work, creative projects, or learning new skills, life becomes more fulfilling. Social media trains your brain to expect constant stimulation and frequent rewards. This makes sustained attention on any single activity feel boring or difficult. Your focus becomes fragmented, jumping from one thing to another every few minutes. As this conditioning fades, your natural capacity for sustained attention returns. Reading becomes enjoyable again. Complex projects become engaging rather than overwhelming. You rediscover the deep satisfaction that comes from completing something meaningful instead of just consuming endless streams of brief, shallow content. The question isn't whether social media is inherently good or bad, it's whether your current relationship with it is serving your mental clarity and overall well-being. Based on my experience and conversations with others who've tried similar experiments, here are the key insights for creating a healthier relationship with digital platforms. The gradual approach versus complete break. Some people benefit from a complete break, like I did, while others do better with gradual reduction. If the idea of deleting all social media apps feels too extreme, start by removing them from your phone while keeping access on your computer. This creates natural friction. You can still check social media, but it requires intentional decision rather than unconscious habit. Another effective approach is time blocking. Choose specific times of day when social media is available to you and keep it completely off limits during other hours. Many people find that avoiding social media for the first hour after waking up and the last hour before bed creates significant improvements in sleep quality and morning mental clarity. Creating replacement habits. The most challenging part of reducing social media isn't the withdrawal, it's figuring out what to do with all the small moments throughout the day that you used to fill with scrolling. This is where preparation becomes crucial. Keep a book or e-reader easily accessible for moments when you would normally scroll. Not self-help or productivity books necessarily, but something genuinely engaging that you enjoy reading. Fiction works particularly well because it exercises your imagination and empathy in ways that social media doesn't. Develop a collection of offline activities for different situations. Something portable for when you're waiting somewhere, something hands-on for restless energy, something creative for when you want mental stimulation. The key is having these alternatives ready before you need them, because in the moment of wanting to scroll, it's hard to think of good alternatives. The notification strategy. Even if you're not ready to delete social media apps entirely, turning off all non-essential notifications can create significant improvements in mental clarity. Your phone should notify you about calls, texts from close friends and family, and truly urgent matters. Everything else can wait until you choose to check it. This simple change eliminates the constant interruption of your thoughts throughout the day. Instead of your attention being pulled away every few minutes, you can complete thoughts, finish tasks, and maintain focus for extended periods. Mindful re-engagement. If and when you decide to reintroduce social media into your life, do it mindfully. Start with one platform at a time and pay attention to how it affects your mental state, sleep quality, and ability to focus. Some people discover they can handle Instagram but not Twitter, or Facebook but not TikTok. Others find that they can engage with social media occasionally without problems, but daily use quickly recreates the old patterns. The key is treating social media reintegration as an ongoing experiment rather than a permanent decision. Your needs and reactions may change over time, and what works for you might be different from what works for others. Building natural buffers. One of the most valuable things I learned was to create natural buffers around focused activities. Before starting any meaningful work, I'd put my phone in another room or turn it completely off. This eliminated the possibility of unconscious checking and allowed me to sink into whatever I was doing without digital interruption. Similarly, I started protecting transition times, the space between activities where your mind naturally processes what just happened and prepares for what's next. These moments used to be filled with automatic phone checking, but they're actually valuable for mental integration and clarity. The social element. Don't underestimate the social challenges of reducing social media use. You might miss some invitations, feel less connected to acquaintances, or have fewer conversation starters with people who primarily communicate through social platforms. These are real costs, and they're worth acknowledging. Many people find that reducing social media actually improves their close relationships because they're more present during in-person interactions and more likely to reach out directly to people they care about. But it can affect more casual social connections, and you'll need to decide what trade-offs feel worthwhile to you. The benefits I expected from taking a break from social media were fairly obvious: more time, less distraction, and improved focus. But the changes that surprised me the most were subtler and more profound than anything I had anticipated. Boredom, it turns out, is not the enemy I thought it was. Those moments of having nothing specific to do, when your mind has no external input to process, are actually where some of the most interesting mental activity happens. Without the option to immediately fill every empty moment with scrolling, I began to appreciate boredom as a natural state that often leads to unexpected insights or creative ideas. I started looking forward to situations I used to dread: waiting in line, sitting in traffic, having a few minutes between appointments. These became opportunities for my mind to wander freely, make unexpected connections, or simply rest in a way that scrolling never provided. There's something almost sacred about genuine boredom that our culture has forgotten. It's in these unstimulated moments that your mind begins what psychologists call default mode network activity, the brain's background processing that consolidates memories, generates insights, and makes creative connections. Social media hijacks this natural process, filling every potential moment of boredom with external stimulation. I remember sitting in a doctor's waiting room around day 12 with nothing to do and no phone to escape into. At first, the familiar restlessness arose, that itch for stimulation. But I stayed with it, and after a few minutes, my mind began wandering in the most delightful way. I started thinking about a conversation I'd had with my grandmother years ago, which led to memories of her garden, which sparked an idea for a creative project I'd been stuck on for months. None of this would have happened if I'd been scrolling through my phone. Improved decision-making. One change I didn't anticipate was how much clearer my decision-making became. Social media exposes you to countless opinions, choices, and possibilities throughout the day. Even if you're not consciously processing all of this information, your brain is working overtime to categorize, compare, and make sense of endless options and viewpoints. Without this constant input of other people's choices and opinions, I found it much easier to connect with my own preferences and values. Decisions that used to feel overwhelming, what to cook for dinner, which book to read next, how to spend weekend time, became simpler and more intuitive. The psychological concept of decision fatigue became much clearer to me during this period. When you're constantly exposed to other people's lifestyle choices, purchase decisions, career moves, and personal philosophies through social media, your brain treats each exposure as a micro-decision point. Should I want what they have? Should I agree with this opinion? Should I change my approach based on what I'm seeing? These aren't conscious decisions, but they consume mental energy nonetheless. Without this background noise of endless alternatives and opinions, my own inner compass became much clearer. I stopped second-guessing simple choices and started trusting my initial instincts more. This wasn't about becoming closed-minded or avoiding input from others. It was about creating space to hear my own voice among all the external noise. Enhanced appreciation. Perhaps the most unexpected gift was a renewed capacity for appreciation. When you're not constantly seeing curated highlights from other people's lives, your own experiences become more satisfying by comparison. A simple meal tastes better when you're not simultaneously looking at pictures of elaborate dishes on Instagram. A quiet evening at home feels more peaceful when you're not comparing it to the exciting activities others are posting about. This isn't about being ignorant of what's possible or avoiding inspiration from others. It's about allowing your own experiences to be enough, at least sometimes, without constant comparison to an endless stream of alternatives. I noticed this most clearly during simple pleasures that had somehow lost their impact over the years. Reading a book without documenting it, taking a walk without photographing it, having a conversation without thinking about how to describe it later. These experiences became richer and more satisfying when they existed purely for themselves, without the layer of potential social media content. The psychological term for this is hedonic adaptation, our tendency to return to a baseline level of happiness despite positive changes in our lives. Social media accelerates this process by constantly exposing us to new standards of what we should want or achieve. When you remove that constant upward pressure of comparison, ordinary experiences regain their natural capacity to bring satisfaction and joy. Physical awareness. I became much more aware of my physical body and its needs. Without the constant option to escape into digital distraction, I started noticing when I was tired, hungry, restless, or uncomfortable. These physical signals, which I'd been unconsciously suppressing with phone usage, became valuable information that helped me take better care of myself. Sleep improved not just because I wasn't looking at screens before bed, but because I was more in tune with my natural energy rhythms throughout the day. I started napping when I felt tired instead of scrolling to push through fatigue. I took walks when I felt restless instead of sitting still while scrolling for stimulation. This reconnection with physical awareness extended beyond basic needs. I started noticing the subtle ways that different environments affected my mood and energy, the way natural light changed throughout the day, how different foods made me feel hours after eating them, the physical sensations that accompany different emotional states. Social media creates a peculiar form of dissociation from the body. You're physically present but mentally elsewhere, processing other people's experiences instead of your own. Your body might be sitting in a beautiful park, but your mind is scrolling through images of other places, other experiences, other lives. This split attention prevents you from fully inhabiting your own physical experience. When that split attention resolved, I began experiencing what embodiment practitioners call somatic awareness, a fuller presence in my own physical experience. This wasn't about becoming obsessed with the body or overly analytical about physical sensations. It was simply about being more present to the full range of information available through physical experience. Deeper relationships. The people closest to me started commenting on changes they noticed in my presence and attention during conversations. I wasn't consciously trying to be a better listener or a more attentive friend, but removing the background mental noise of social media apparently made space for deeper engagement with the people actually in front of me. My partner mentioned that I seemed more here during our evening conversations. Friends noticed that I was asking different kinds of questions, more curious, less surface level. I realized that much of my conversational energy had been unconsciously influenced by the types of interactions I was used to having on social media: quick, reactive, performance-oriented, rather than genuinely connective. Without the constant stream of social comparison and status updates from hundreds of acquaintances, I became more interested in the actual lives of the people I spent time with. Instead of already knowing the highlights of everyone's recent experiences through their posts, I found myself genuinely curious about what was happening in their inner worlds. This shift also affected how I shared my own experiences. Instead of processing events through the lens of how they might appear on social media, I began sharing them more selectively and authentically with people who were actually present in my life. Stories became richer because they weren't compressed into post-size summaries. Emotions became more nuanced because they weren't flattened into emoji reactions. Creative renaissance. The return of creative energy was perhaps the most professionally valuable change. Ideas started coming more frequently and feeling more original. I began writing again, not because I made time for it, but because ideas demanded to be expressed. I started noticing interesting details in my environment that sparked curiosity and creative projects. This wasn't about having more time for creativity, it was about my mind naturally generating creative thoughts when it wasn't constantly processing external creative content from social media. The difference between inspiration and imitation became much clearer during this period. Social media provides endless streams of creative content that can feel inspiring but often leads to unconscious copying or variation rather than genuine original expression. When I removed that constant input, my own creative voice began to emerge more clearly. I started a daily practice that I hadn't done in years, keeping a small notebook with me and jotting down interesting observations, random thoughts, or creative ideas as they arose. These weren't profound insights necessarily, but they were mine. They came from my actual experience rather than from my reaction to other people's creative content. The creative projects I started during this period had a different quality than my previous work. They felt more personal, more authentic, more connected to my actual interests and experiences rather than to current trends or popular themes I'd absorbed through social media exposure. The most important insight from this experiment isn't that social media is inherently harmful or that everyone should delete their accounts. It's that our relationship with these platforms often develops unconsciously, and bringing awareness to that relationship can reveal possibilities we didn't know existed. Mental clarity isn't a destination you arrive at, it's a natural state that emerges when you remove what's obscuring it. For many of us, social media has become one of the primary sources of mental obscuration, not because it's evil or dangerous, but because it's designed to capture and hold attention in ways that interfere with our mind's natural rhythms of focus and rest. The integration challenge. The real test of this experiment came when I had to decide what to do after the 21 days were complete. I had experienced benefits that I didn't want to lose, but I also recognized that complete social media abstinence might not be sustainable or necessary for long-term well-being. I decided to reintroduce social media gradually and mindfully, treating it as an ongoing experiment rather than a permanent decision. I started with Instagram since it felt the least problematic of the platforms I'd been using. I allowed myself to check it once per day at a specific time for a maximum of 15 minutes. What surprised me was how different social media felt after 3 weeks away from it. The content that used to feel engaging now felt somehow artificial and performative. The endless scroll that used to captivate me for hours now felt repetitive and shallow after just a few minutes. My tolerance for the emotional manipulation built into these platforms had decreased significantly. I found myself naturally curating my feeds more carefully, unfollowing accounts that consistently left me feeling worse about myself or my life. I became much more conscious of the emotional state I was in when I opened these apps and the emotional state I was in when I closed them. When the net effect was negative, I knew it was time to take another break. Sustainable strategies. Through trial and error over the following months, I developed several strategies that help maintain the mental clarity benefits while still engaging with social media when it serves a genuine purpose. The first strategy is what I call intentional opening. Before opening any social media app, I pause and ask myself what I'm hoping to accomplish. Am I looking for specific information, trying to connect with particular people, avoiding uncomfortable feelings, filling time because I'm bored? This simple pause eliminates most unconscious habitual usage. The second strategy involves creating physical barriers to automatic usage. I moved all social media apps off my phone's home screen and into a folder that requires several taps to access. I also enabled the built-in screen time limits on my phone, not as hard restrictions, but as gentle reminders when I've been scrolling longer than intended. The third strategy is batch processing. Instead of checking social media throughout the day, I designate specific times, usually once in the morning and once in the evening for all social media activity. This allows me to stay connected without fragmenting my attention throughout the day. Perhaps most importantly, I learned to view social media breaks as a regular maintenance practice rather than a one-time experiment. Just as you might fast occasionally to reset your digestive system, periodic social media fasts help reset your attention and mental clarity. I now take a week-long break from all social platforms every month, and I notice the benefits accumulating over time. Long-term perspective. 6 months after my initial 21-day experiment, the changes in my mental clarity have not only persisted but continue to deepen. The ability to focus on single tasks for extended periods has become natural again. The constant background anxiety that I didn't even realize I was carrying has largely dissolved. Most importantly, I trust my own mind again, its ability to entertain me, guide me, and generate the insights I need. I've spoken with dozens of people who have tried similar experiments, and while everyone's experience is different, certain patterns emerge consistently. Most people underestimate how much social media is affecting their mental state until they step away from it. Most people find the first few days more difficult than they expected, followed by a breakthrough around day 7 to 10. And most people discover benefits they didn't anticipate, particularly in the areas of creativity, emotional regulation, and relationship quality. But perhaps the most important pattern is this. People who approach social media more consciously after taking a break tend to maintain better mental health and clarity over time. The break itself isn't the solution, it's the awareness that comes from the break that creates lasting change. The larger question. This experiment raised larger questions about the relationship between technology and human flourishing that extend far beyond social media. We're living through an unprecedented period in human history where the majority of our daily stimulation comes from artificial sources, screens, algorithms, and digitally mediated experiences rather than direct contact with the natural world and unmediated human relationships. The human brain evolved over millions of years to handle a certain type and intensity of stimulation. The sudden introduction of supernormal stimuli, content designed to be more engaging than anything in the natural world, creates novel challenges for our attention, emotional regulation, and sense of meaning that we're only beginning to understand. Social media is just one piece of this larger puzzle, but it's a significant piece because of how seamlessly it integrates into daily life and how skillfully it's designed to capture and hold attention. The techniques used by social media platforms, variable reward schedules, social comparison triggers, fear of missing out, are based on decades of psychological research into human motivation and behavior. Understanding these techniques doesn't make you immune to them, but it does help you make more conscious choices about when and how you engage with platforms that use them. The goal isn't to become a digital hermit, but to develop what some researchers call digital wisdom, the ability to use technology in ways that enhance rather than diminish human flourishing. Personal sustainability. The question I get asked most often about this experiment is whether the changes were permanent or whether I eventually return to my old social media habits. The honest answer is that it's an ongoing process rather than a permanent transformation. Some days I use social media mindfully and it feels like a positive addition to my day. Other days I catch myself falling into old patterns of unconscious scrolling and need to implement stricter boundaries. What has changed permanently, though, is my awareness of the relationship between my social media usage and my mental state. I can now recognize within minutes when social media is affecting me negatively, and I have tools and strategies for addressing that quickly rather than letting it compound over days or weeks. I've also developed what I think of as mental clarity maintenance practices that help preserve the benefits I gained during my initial break. These include regular meditation, daily walks without any digital devices, weekly technology Sabbaths, and monthly longer breaks from social platforms. The most sustainable approach I found is treating mental clarity not as a goal to achieve, but as a natural state to protect. This means being vigilant about activities, relationships, and habits that cloud clarity while actively cultivating those that support it. Social media can be either supportive or harmful depending on how it's used, and maintaining that awareness requires ongoing attention and adjustment. The 21 days taught me that small changes in how we interact with technology can create profound shifts in how we experience life. Your mind already has everything it needs to think clearly, focus deeply, and generate original insights. The question is whether you're creating the conditions that allow these natural capacities to emerge. Whether you choose to take a complete break from social media, reduce your usage, or simply bring more awareness to how these platforms affect your mental state, the goal is the same: reclaiming your natural capacity for clarity, creativity, and presence. Your mind is far more interesting than any feed you could scroll through. It just needs a little space and silence to remind you of what it can do. The path back to mental clarity isn't complicated, but it does require the courage to sit with your own thoughts, to be occasionally bored, and to trust that your mind knows how to entertain, inspire, and guide you when given the chance. What you discover when you create that space might surprise you as much as it surprised me. In a world that profits from your distraction, choosing clarity becomes a radical act. Not a dramatic, life overhaul kind of radical, but the quiet, persistent kind of radical that changes you from the inside out. The kind that reminds you who you are when nobody's watching, when no notifications are pinging, when it's just you and the vast, interesting landscape of your own mind. That mind has been waiting patiently for your return. It has things to show you, insights to offer, and creative ideas that belong only to you. All it needs is a little space to breathe and the chance to remember what it was like before the noise took over.